Nature tries to warn us before things go sideways. The problem is, most of us aren't paying attention anymore. Cows start acting weird before earthquakes, and scientists are actually taking notes. Ocean heat can turn a minor storm into a monster in just a few hours. And the northern lights showing up where they don't belong? That's not just a pretty sky. I'm Mike with List 25, and these are 25 alarming patterns in nature that precede disaster. 25. Farm animals acting strange before earthquakes. Animals know things we don't. That's not some mystical claim or old wives' tale. It's increasingly backed by hard data. Before earthquakes, farm animals get restless in ways that don't match their normal daily routines. Cows pace around their pastures for no apparent reason. Dogs refuse to go outside no matter how much you coax them. Rodents bolt from their underground burrows in the middle of the day when they'd normally be hiding from predators. These reports have shown up throughout recorded history, and for a long time, scientists dismissed them as coincidence or selective memory. But researchers decided to actually test it properly. They strapped motion sensors onto cows and sheep and tracked their movements for months. When they lined up that movement data with seismic activity in the same region, the results were tough to brush off. About 20 hours before earthquakes struck, the animals ramped up their activity in ways that were statistically significant. Something in the environment was triggering them. We just haven't nailed down exactly what signal they're picking up on yet. 24. Jet stream fracturing. The jet stream keeps weather moving along. It's this fast-moving band of air high in the atmosphere that circles the planet and pushes storm systems so they don't just park themselves over one spot forever. Most of the time, it works beautifully. But when it fractures and splits apart, weather systems lose their momentum. They stall out. And that's when things get ugly fast. Late 2024 and early 2025 saw some unusual splitting events that preceded brutal conditions across multiple continents. Heat waves that wouldn't break, floods that kept coming day after day, cold snaps that caught entire regions off guard. When the jet stream falls apart, you get stuck with whatever weather happens to be sitting over your head. Crops cook under the relentless sun. Rivers overflow until entire valleys flood. Power grids buckle under demand. They weren't designed to handle it for weeks on end. Meteorologists have started watching for these fracturing patterns because they've learned that extreme conditions often follow. 23. Coastal cities physically sinking. Here's something that doesn't make headlines nearly often enough. Major coastal cities around the world are physically dropping. The ground beneath them is sinking, sometimes by several centimeters in just a few months. This happens when too much groundwater gets pumped out from below, while rising seas add pressure from above. The land compresses under those combined forces, and the city ends up sitting lower than it used to. Why should anyone care about a few centimeters? Because when you're talking about areas that already sit close to sea level, every fraction of a millimeter matters enormously. A storm surge that would have flooded streets now floods entire neighborhoods. Water that would have stopped at the doorstep now fills the living room. Satellite radar has caught this sinking happening in real time across cities in Asia, South America, and beyond. Urban planners now recognize it as a silent disaster multiplier. The flooding wasn't worse because the storm was stronger, it was worse because the city was lower than it used to be. 22. Atmospheric rivers that won't move. Atmospheric rivers are basically flying rivers. Huge corridors of moisture that move through the sky and dump rain as they travel. Normally, they pass through, do their thing, and keep going. But lately, some of them have been getting stuck. They park themselves over mountain ranges and just sit there for days, dumping catastrophic amounts of rainfall in a single location. When that happens, the ground saturates fast. Hillsides that have held steady for decades suddenly give way. Dams come under pressure they weren't designed for. What should have been a rough afternoon turns into a multi-day emergency. Emergency crews now track these stalled systems with genuine concern. Every hour one sits in place, the danger compounds. The soil can only absorb so much before it stops holding anything together. 21. Birds flying low or going quiet. When a storm builds offshore or starts gaining strength over land, the weight of the air around it drops. That's called barometric pressure, and birds feel that shift before we do. Some fly lower to the ground than usual. Others stop singing altogether. And in more extreme cases, entire flocks abandon their territory and relocate somewhere else without any obvious reason. People dismiss this as folklore for generations. But modern tracking technology confirms it's real. Birds genuinely do react to atmospheric changes before storms arrive. A sky that suddenly empties of birds or a forest that goes weirdly quiet can tip you off that bad weather is building. It's not foolproof, and it won't tell you exactly when or how bad, but it's one of those patterns that shows up consistently enough that paying attention makes sense. 20. Trees browning when there's plenty of rain. Forests turning brown usually mean drought. That's the assumption most people make, and it's usually correct. But scientists noticed something strange in 2024 and 2025. Trees were browning in areas that had gotten normal rainfall. The water was there in the soil. The trees were dying anyway. What was going on? Turns out, extreme heat can wreck a tree's internal plumbing even when moisture is available. High temperatures cause leaves to lose water faster than roots can replace it. Air bubbles form inside the vessels that carry water through the trunk. Once those bubbles block the flow, the tree dies out from the inside. These browning events often come right before major wildfires broke out. The forests were quietly turning into fuel, while everyone assumed they were fine because it had recently rained. The usual drought indicators completely missed it. 19. Mass die-offs and animals fleeing for no obvious reason. When fish start washing up on beaches in large numbers, or animals abandon their usual territory without warning, something deeper is usually wrong. These mass die-offs and sudden migrations often signal environmental stress that humans haven't detected yet. Toxic algae blooms can poison waterways before anyone realizes the water has turned dangerous. Shifts in ocean chemistry can make entire zones uninhabitable for species that live there for generations. The animals react to these changes before we notice them. The pattern tends to play out in stages. Sensitive species act up first. If the underlying problem keeps building, the effects spread outward through the food web. What starts as a handful of stranded fish can spiral into something much bigger. Scientists now treat these events as early warnings, not just for the animals themselves, but for the broader environmental trouble that tends to follow when ecosystems start showing stress. 18. Plants dying in spots where they've always thrived. When vegetation that's been healthy for years suddenly starts wilting or yellowing in one specific area, something underground has probably changed. Could be shifting groundwater. Could be gas seeping up through the soil. Could be the early signs of a landslide forming beneath the surface. Plants respond to what's happening below ground before those changes become visible to us. Their roots lose access to water because underground reservoirs have shifted, or gases poison the soil and choke the vegetation from underneath. It's subtle and easy to miss if you're not paying attention. But localized die-offs in otherwise stable areas have preceded landslides and volcanic activity often enough that it's worth noticing when healthy plants suddenly aren't healthy anymore. The ground tells the plants first. Then the plants tell us. We just have to be watching. 17. Sounds too low for humans to hear. Big storms and volcanic unrest produce infrasound. These are sound waves pitched so low that human ears can't pick them up at all. We walk right through them without knowing they're there. But elephants can hear them. So can other large animals. They've been observed reacting to distant thunder and seismic rumblings long before any human in the area noticed trouble approaching. These low-frequency vibrations travel enormous distances. They move through the atmosphere ahead of the events that created them. In places without sophisticated monitoring equipment, animal behavior has historically served as one of the only early warning systems available. Scientists are now looking at how to incorporate infrasound detection into disaster preparedness. These invisible waves often carry information that satellites and weather stations miss entirely. The sound is there. We just need better ears. 16. Swarms of small earthquakes. If you live somewhere that gets earthquakes, you've probably felt the little ones. A quick jolt, maybe some rattling dishes, and then it's over. No big deal. But when those little jolts start happening over and over and over again in the same area, that's a different situation entirely. Geologists call it a swarm. Dozens or even hundreds of minor quakes are hitting the same zone within days or weeks of each other. It happens along fault lines and near volcanoes when something underground is adjusting. Japan learned this the hard way when the Noto Peninsula rattled with thousands of tiny quakes for 3 straight years, and then a magnitude 7.5 hit on New Year's Day in 2024. Iceland and Greece have seen similar patterns recently, with swarms building for weeks before bigger trouble followed. Think of it like knuckles cracking. Each pop releases a tiny bit of pressure, but it also shifts that pressure somewhere else entirely. Most swarms don't amount to anything dramatic. They run their course and quiet down. But when the quakes start speeding up or creeping along a fault in one direction, that gets attention fast. The ground is working through something, and all that accumulated tension needs to go somewhere eventually. 15. Clouds that look wrong. The sky tells you what's coming if you know how to read it. Most people glance up, see clouds, and move on with their day. But certain formations carry specific warnings. Towering clouds that build fast usually mean the atmosphere is unstable. A cloud base that sags lower than the rest and hangs there, dark and heavy, often marks the spot where a tornado might form. Storm chasers call that a wall cloud, and they watch it obsessively. A greenish tint spreading across the sky typically means hail is on the way. Funnel shapes dropping from the cloud base means rotation has already started. These visual clues have saved the lives of people who knew what they were looking at. You don't need radar to spot these warnings. You just need to look up and understand what the sky is showing you. 14. Tiny tremors before the ground gives way. Before a landslide happens, the ground often rumbles in ways too faint for humans to feel. Small seismic vibrations are caused by rock shifting position, soil cracking under strain, and saturated sediment starting to slip downhill. These microseismic events build up as a slope destabilizes. They're invisible to us, but sensitive instruments can catch them and track how they change over time. When the frequency and intensity start climbing, that's often a sign that the main collapse isn't far off. The ground is essentially groaning under its own weight before it gives way. It's not a perfect system. Sometimes the tremors build and nothing happens. But catching those faint signals early has helped evacuate people from danger zones before hillsides came crashing down on places where they'd been standing. 13. Rivers turning muddy out of nowhere. Clear water turning cloudy is worth paying attention to. When a stream or river that ran clear yesterday suddenly looks brown or milky today, sediment is washing in from somewhere upstream. That could mean heavy rain is destabilizing slopes above the waterway. It could mean the ground up there is already starting to fail and slide toward the valley below. Either way, something changed. People who live near rivers have used this pattern as an early warning for generations. It's not high tech, it doesn't require any special equipment. You just have to notice when the water looks different from what it did before. Flash floods and landslides have followed murky water often enough that treating it as a signal makes sense. When the river changes color, it's telling you something happened upstream that you probably can't see yet. 12. Cows losing their sense of direction. Okay, this one sounds weird, but stay with me here because scientists have actually studied this. Cattle tend to align themselves along the Earth's magnetic field when they graze, north-south orientation when they eat and rest. Researchers have documented this pattern across multiple continents, and it holds up consistently enough to be statistically measurable. What gets interesting is what happens before significant earthquakes. That alignment breaks down. Cows start clustering randomly, moving in ways that don't follow their usual patterns. They look confused about which direction they should be facing. Researchers think subtle shifts in the local magnetic field throw off the animal's internal compass. Stress building along fault zones creates geomagnetic anomalies that disrupt whatever navigational sense the cows normally rely on. It's not a prediction method yet, but it's one more piece of evidence that animals sense things happening underground that we completely miss. 11. Barometric pressure dropping fast. When a hurricane or tropical cyclone approaches, barometric pressure falls. That drop shows up on instruments well before wind and rain arrive, sometimes giving hours of advance notice. The faster and deeper the pressure drops, the stronger the incoming storm tends to be. A gradual decline suggests something manageable. A plunge suggests you should finish your preparations quickly. Coastal communities have used barometers as early warning tools for generations. The technology for measuring pressure hasn't changed much because it doesn't need to. The atmosphere announces what's coming before you can see it on the horizon. Modern forecasting adds layers of sophistication, but the basic principle remains reliable. When the barometer starts falling fast, nature is telling you to pay attention. 10. Everything going quiet. There's a reason people talk about the calm before a storm. It's a real phenomenon that happens for physical reasons, not just poetic ones. Birds stop singing. Insects go silent. The usual background hum of nature fades away to nothing. That sudden quiet often means barometric pressure is dropping and severe weather is building nearby. Animals instinctively reduce activity when conditions turn hostile. They hunker down, conserve energy, and wait for things to pass. Humans walking through that silence often feel like something's off without being able to explain exactly what. In tornado-prone regions, that eerie stillness can arrive just minutes before a storm touches down. When the world around you suddenly goes quiet in a way that feels wrong, it's worth taking seriously. 9. Methane blowing through Arctic ground. Permafrost isn't so permanent anymore. As temperatures rise in northern regions, ground that stayed frozen for thousands of years has started thawing. And that thaw releases things that were trapped down there. Organic material buried in frozen soil starts decomposing when it warms up. That decomposition produces methane gas. The gas builds up beneath the surface, pressure increases, and eventually it finds a weak point and blows through. Sometimes violently. Satellite sensors caught multiple sudden methane releases in 2024 and 2025, particularly across Siberia's Yamal and Taimyr peninsulas, where mysterious craters have been appearing since 2014. These bursts often happen days before the ground collapsed or nearby infrastructure failed. The Arctic is developing pressure pockets beneath its surface, and they're unpredictable. Pipelines, roads, and communities sit on ground that could rupture without much warning. What used to be stable is becoming increasingly less so. 8. Tides acting stranger than usual. Abnormal tide patterns can signal that something is shifting on the ocean floor. In regions where tectonic plates converge, unusual fluctuations in sea levels sometimes appear before underwater earthquakes capable of generating tsunamis. This isn't the same as the dramatic drawback that happens right before a tsunami wave hits shore. That's a different phenomenon. This is subtler. Changes in tidal behavior that might show up days or weeks before a major seismic event release. Monitoring these tidal oddities adds another layer to early warning systems. It's not precise enough to predict specific events, but when the ocean starts behaving differently, it's often responding to forces building beneath the seafloor. Combining tidal observations with seismic data helps researchers assess risk more accurately. The ocean knows what's happening underneath it before we do. 7. Ecosystems flickering before they crash. Nature doesn't usually collapse all at once. It wobbles first. Scientists actually call this flickering, and it's one of the clearest warning signs that an ecosystem is running out of rope. Take lakes, for example. A healthy lake stays pretty consistent, but when too many nutrients start pouring in from farms or sewage or runoff, the lake enters this weird phase where it can't decide what it wants to be. One week the water looks clear, the next it's green with algae, clear again, green again, and that back and forth can go on for months or even years before the lake finally gives up and stays choked with growth permanently. Woodlands do something similar when drought or disease pushes them past their limits. Trees start dying in waves. Some bounce back, then more die. A few recover. The swing gets wider and more dramatic each time until the whole forest shifts into something unrecognizable. Spotting that wobble early matters because there's sometimes a narrow window to step in and ease the pressure. Once the system fully tips, restoration becomes a project measured in decades. And honestly, some places never find their way back to what they were. 6. Gas seeping up from fault lines. Here's something most people don't think about. The Earth leaks. Gases trapped deep underground find their way to the surface through cracks and fissures, and the mix of what comes up can tell you a lot about what's going on below. Radon gets a lot of attention from researchers because it's easy to track. It's a naturally occurring radioactive gas that seeps up from rocks, and that radioactivity gives it a signature that's simple to pick up with the right equipment. Wells and soil near active faults get tested regularly in places where earthquakes are a concern. A sudden jump in radon levels is like a red flag waving. It means rock is breaking apart somewhere beneath your feet. Cracks are forming. Pockets of trapped gas that sat still for centuries are suddenly on the move. That doesn't mean disaster is guaranteed, but it does mean the underground landscape just changed. Teams running monitoring stations watch these readings obsessively in places like Japan, California, and Italy. When the numbers spike, it goes on the board alongside seismic readings and ground deformation data. Every clue helps when you're trying to stay ahead of what the planet might do next. 5. Birds acting erratically before earthquakes. Now, I already talked about birds going quiet or flying low before storms, but earthquakes bring out a different kind of weirdness in them. They don't just get subdued, they get chaotic. Flocks suddenly change directions mid-flight for no apparent reason. Birds abandon nesting sites they've used for years. Groups congregate in locations where nobody's ever seen them gather before. It looks random, almost panicked. Before the devastating 2023 earthquake in Turkey, people captured video of birds behaving exactly like this. The footage spread online, and it showed flight patterns that looked completely disorganized. Wings everywhere, no clear direction, nothing that resembled normal movement. Nobody knows for certain what sets them off. Maybe they're sensing vibrations in the ground that haven't reached the surface yet. Maybe the Earth's magnetic field wobbles slightly before a big quake and throws off their navigation. Maybe something in the air changes. Researchers are still working on it. What we do know is that the Turkey footage matched reports from other earthquakes throughout history. Birds seem to get advance notice somehow. Figuring out their early warning system could eventually help us build a better one of our own. 4. Hillside plants showing stress. Vegetation on slopes can reveal when the ground beneath it is getting dangerously saturated. After heavy or prolonged rainfall, plants sometimes start yellowing, wilting, or drooping before the hillside itself shows any visible instability. These stress signals indicate that the soil is holding more water than it can handle. Cohesion between soil particles drops. The likelihood of a slide increases. Most people wouldn't think to check the plants on a hillside after a storm, but for communities in landslide-prone regions, paying attention to vegetation health can provide early warning. The plants react to conditions underground before those conditions become obvious on the surface. Roots sitting in the oversaturated soil send distress signals up to the leaves. By the time the hillside looks unstable to human eyes, the plants have been showing stress for a while already. 3. Insects swarming before weather turns. Bugs feel atmospheric pressure changes more accurately than we do. Before heavy rain or severe weather moves in, insects often swarm in unusual numbers or scatter from their normal hangouts. Flying insects, especially, seem to know when the air is about to turn hostile for them. They get active in strange ways before storms arrive, sometimes swarming, sometimes disappearing entirely. Farmers and outdoor workers have noticed this pattern for generations. When the bugs start acting strange, something's usually coming. It's not sophisticated forecasting, you can't build weather models around it, but it's one of those old observations that holds up when you pay attention to it. The insects know. They've always known. We're just not as tuned into what they're telling us. 2. Hidden ocean heat supercharging storms. Meteorologists have been losing sleep over this one. Hurricanes that should take days to strengthen have been going from mild to catastrophic in a matter of hours. Morning forecasts say one thing, but by dinner, everything has changed. The culprit is warm water hiding below the ocean's surface. Not the top layer that satellites can read easily, but deeper pockets of heat that don't show up until a storm passes right over them. When that happens, the storm basically stumbles onto a massive energy source nobody saw coming. All that warmth gets pulled up into the system, and the whole thing explodes in strength. This happened repeatedly during 2024 and 2025. Storms in both the Atlantic and Pacific jumped categories way faster than the models said they should. Forecasters watching their screens saw numbers climb that weren't supposed to climb that quickly. The real problem is what this does to evacuation plans. People who thought they had 2 days to prepare suddenly have 12 hours. Communities board up for a Category 2 and wake up to a Category 4 bearing down on them. Finding these underwater hotspots before storms reach them has become an urgent priority, because right now, the ocean keeps surprising us. 1. Auroras showing up where they don't belong. And finally, for our last entry, we're ending on something seemingly beautiful. But don't let the pretty colors fool you. If you've ever wanted to see the Aurora Borealis, you probably know the drill. Book a trip to Alaska, Norway, Iceland, or somewhere else way up north, bundle up, stay out late, and hope the sky cooperates. That's where these light shows are supposed to happen. So, when people in Texas, or here in Florida, or Southern Europe start posting photos of green and purple ribbons overhead, that's not just a cool bonus. That's a sign that the sun threw something serious our way. Solar storms send charged particles slamming into Earth's magnetic field. And when the storm is strong enough, it pushes those glowing curtains of light into places they don't normally reach. Here's the catch. The same solar tantrums that create those stunning displays can also wreak havoc on technology. Power grids get hit with extra electrical current they weren't designed for. Satellites lose their orientation or go offline entirely. Radio communications get scrambled. There have been nights where people stood in their backyards marveling at colors they'd never seen before, completely unaware that transformers were overheating a few towns over. The lights are a warning dressed up as a gift. When the Aurora comes to visit somewhere unexpected, it's worth asking, what else might be coming along with it? And that wraps things up. Nature communicates with us constantly, from restless livestock to flickering ecosystems to unexpected lights dancing across the sky. The patterns are there for anyone willing to notice them. So, pay attention to what's happening around you, because sometimes the best early warning system is just keeping your eyes open. If you want to keep exploring the stranger side of our planet, click here to check out 25 mind-boggling natural phenomena you won't believe exist. That's it for today. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit that bell so you never miss out on any of our content. And I'll see you in the next one.